Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. Darren Mitchell here, and a very warm welcome to Mr. Mark Winey, all the way from New Jersey. I should say New Jersey.
In New York Metro. Yeah.
Welcome to the podcast, Mark. It's great to have you on board.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Now, we're just talking before we press record that there's a slight time difference. You are sitting there right now at about 8 p.m. on a Monday evening, so I greatly appreciate you working outside of work hours. So this will be a great conversation.
No worries. My current manager is in Australia, so I'm used to making meetings at all types of odd times.
Fantastic. And the great thing about this is we get to chat about sales and all sorts of things around pre-sales in particular. So for the listeners, I'll just give a brief introduction. You currently are the head of sales and go-to-market strategy with North America at SwarmDynamics.ai. You've got a very interesting background and a long-established background in sales and pre-sales. Looking forward to this conversation. For the listeners' benefit, can you just give us a little bit of background on your career, but specifically what has led you into the marketplace right now that you now focus on the pre-sales element, the sales engineering focus, and the go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I'll try to summarize 20 some years in just a few moments, right? So I've been in pre-sales all the way back since 1999. I was coming out of implementation at KPMG and Deloitte, and as a little burned out, and a very smart recruiter introduced me to the idea of sales engineering. I did not know what that space was, and he explained it. And to me, it sounded like implementation without the pressure. It sounded like an opportunity to help people with somewhat less hours, because I had been working, nights and weekends, and not a go live, looming deadline constantly over your head. Yeah. And once I made that transition, I really, really enjoyed it. I worked for a number of companies, both large and small. I've worked for leading GRC companies like SAI 360 and Metric Stream. I worked for smaller companies and some startups. And that was really interesting to me because I got to put on my PMP hat as a former project manager and help kind of create scalable processes. As I learned to be a good SE, I learned to create process and playbooks so the second and third and fourth SE in the door would have a better onboarding experience and could ramp up quicker. And I guess to wrap up this intro, it also led me to fun projects in sales enablement where I was able to train SEs or lead an SE team or lead an enablement team that included account executives. So recently, my passion for building process and playbooks has evolved into go-to-market strategy because I'm just kind of hooked on startups. So that brings us kind of to where I am today as head of sales and go-to-market at SwarmDynamics, a very new company from Australia now entering the US market.
Amazing. And hey, we'll call you an Aussie for the purposes of this interview, because I know you said your boss is in Australia, so you're used to working on these hours anyway. That's fine. Yes. So when we talk about sales engineering or pre-sales, I want to try to get really clear, because a lot of the times when we're talking about sales, we kind of use that term in a ubiquitous sort of way that covers a lot of different areas. Just for people listening to this and thinking about, okay, well, how do I understand what is the role of somebody in pre-sales as distinct from somebody who is just a salesperson / an account manager? Is there a distinction? And if so, what is the clear distinction?
There absolutely is. And it's great to have this discussion. I failed to mention this in my intro, but I actually did carry a quota a few years ago. So I have a deep, deep appreciation for those pure people that do purely outside sales. And I do admit that there is some overlap. If I could draw a Venn diagram for your listeners on audio, there would be overlap in the middle. I've always felt that a very exceptional SE could do the entire pitch or presentation if his account executive was stuck in traffic. Why? Because he's seen the company story 1,000 times, right?
Yeah.
And he knows how to sell value. Likewise, I think an exceptional account executive could probably stumble through, let's say, a trade show level demo using my quotey fingers to just cover the basics high level, again, because they've seen it 1,000 times. So then where's the difference, right? The difference essentially is it is kind of a career in and of itself to keep up with the constant updates to the software. The development cycles are quicker and the iteration is quicker. So keeping up with that and being able to deeply configure the solution to make it meaningful, to prepare for the meeting. Those are all the domain of the SE. And today with demo automation that can spin up recordings very quickly for the high level, there is a lot of overlap where either a recording or the account executive could do the first level intro demo, then relying on the SE to do the configured demo or POC. And quite frankly, we usually embrace that because nothing can be more boring than going through a routine path when you're a technically oriented person. So successful SE has to be excellent with configuration, excellent product knowledge, but they also have to have the sales skills. This is where the overlap is, to know what features to show, what features to not show for a particular customer, and how to establish business value for each part of their journey through the software. On the AE side, and one of the reasons I didn't stay that path, by the way, they own the forecast, right? They own the promise of the close. Now, granted, we can enable that close, but being on the hook for that or going through forecast meetings, that's their domain. And I've seen how they take really, really close, sometimes micromanagement, but really, really close oversight of that forecast. And that's a whole different story that we as pre-sales don't get involved in pricing. And we may have some signals to contribute to the forecast, but we don't own it the way that the account executive does.
It's funny as you're talking about that, Mark. Because we've just come off in Australia the end of the financial year, so we're in the first quarter of the new financial year, and I was just reflecting at the end of June how many meetings I had to go through leading into the end of, particularly an end of financial year, and these cadence reviews about the forecast. Where it almost came down in the last week where we're having twice daily cadence reviews, and the senior leaders were expecting the commit in the morning to be higher in the afternoon. And it was nuts. Talk about pressure. It was incredible. But it's part of the deal, I guess.
However you call them cadence reviews. I might call it a forecast review or a whipping session.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever it is, it's always the same to just go line by line through that. And one of my frustrations as a pre-sales leader is I love going to an SKO or sales kickoff from the perspective of learning the product roadmap, what's on the horizon, updated messaging, new partnerships, vision for the year. That's all very valuable. But sometimes my team sits through these forecast whipping sessions, right? And it doesn't add much value to us specifically, unless there is a technical roadblock that we can contribute to for that particular item, for that particular client or prospect. So we're always fighting to have a breakout session, either in another room or another city, to make sure that we're in the room for the corporate pieces, maybe out of the room for the sales specific pieces where we can demo to each other, share best practices, what's working, what's resonating with you, because subconsciously as I demo, I've sort of got my own top 10 list for what I think works. But over time, subconsciously, as people react to me, I will adjust my core message and my style to just get incrementally better. So even if they train you all in January, I guarantee you by June, there's some subtle differences
Yeah.
in what the team is doing.
Yeah.
So I really value that collaborative time to share tips and tricks.
It also bears asking the question as well in terms of sales teams, right? And ultimately, I guess the ownership of the customer or the ownership of the overarching strategy that goes to market. Now, you talk about being a head of sales and having the go-to-market strategy role. Um, how important, from your perspective and based on your experience, is, I guess, the integration of pre-sales and sales in order to get the best outcome for the customer that delivers sustainable success? Now, I know it's probably a loaded question because the answer is obviously they have to work hand in glove. But as part of that, what are some of the challenges that you've identified where perhaps we have a little bit of a disconnect between pre-sales and sales?
Yeah, excellent point. Early in my career, I created a lot of friction. I wanted to do well. And sometimes it became a game of good cop, bad cop, where an enthusiastic SE just wanted to close the deal and say yes to everything, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And keeping that prospect happy and energized when I had to slowly raise my hand and say, in the beginning, I wasn't quite as polished. I would say something like, well, that's not exactly true, and then I would get killed after the meeting, and then we'd both have to go before our bosses, the pre-sales leader and the AE leader, and who's being truthful and who's not being truthful, and sort it all out. I learned to be much more diplomatic. So today it's more like if something really wild is thrown out there, um, let me tell you, Mr. Customer, how we would approach that. And there are certain constraints, and I don't want to be the department of no, the
yeah.
one who says, no, we can't demo, no, we can't do that. So learning to work with what you have. And I think the value that I bring to the table is kind of having that PMP or project manager mindset. One of the core tenets of the PMP certification is stakeholder management.
Mm,
And they do that from a client delivery perspective, but from a go-to-market perspective, to me, stakeholder management means, just as you said, the alignment of the account executive strategy with the pre-sale strategy, with the marketing strategy, with the product development or roadmap strategy,
yeah.
and trying to stay plugged in to all those stakeholders and gain consensus. I remember there was one story I have that comes to mind where I slowly convinced my company to go after a deal that was considered by the executive team to be completely unwinnable.
Hmm.
But by asking a series of questions to go deeper, I encouraged them to reach out to the customer and get additional clarification, ultimately closing the largest deal, to date for the company, like 4.9 million or something along those lines.
Nice. That's nice. So what we're hearing there is we have to have alignment. Now, alignment is a word I think gets thrown out all the time. Yes, we're aligned, we're on the same page, and we're singing from the same hymn sheet, etc., etc.
Yeah.
My own experience with, I guess, SEs and the go-to-market pre-sales guys is often they are shared resource. They're not necessarily dedicated to an account or a portfolio. So particularly in
Yes.
organizations where you've got competition, and sometimes it's very robust competition for those internal resources, that can cause some significant friction. And I've also seen some SEs align themselves to what they consider to be the big, juicy, iconic account. So they think, you know what, if I do this, I might be able to get a bit of a nice ride through on the gravy train, for want of a better term, and that can cause some challenges as well. So what you said before is so true. We have to have everybody aligned, and that's the sales enablement piece where you've got the AE who knows what the strategy is. What does the account look like over the next 3, 6, 12 months and beyond? How do we get pre-sales on board? How do we get marketing on board? How do we get sometimes
Yes.
engineering on board as well, and maybe even finance? So we all
Yeah.
have a part to play in the overarching strategy. So from an SE or sales engineering point of view, pre-sales, how pivotal is the role that you guys play in formulating, if you like, the strategy, the go-to-market strategy, or say a particular strategy for a specific account? How
I
deep
think
involved would you get?
I think we are often, I don't want to say overlooked, but undervalued as a strategic resource. I've written about this quite a bit. If you're not leveraging your SE as a true strategic partner, then really all you're getting is an advanced demo jockey, someone to deliver a demo that's informative and hopefully somewhat entertaining. And that's really not getting the value out of the resource and what you're paying for. So that being said, as part of strategy, what I've done in the past is I've given my input first when it's asked, or second as I grew and matured and gained confidence. I would give my opinion when something didn't quite feel right from my chair or from my
Hmm.
perspective.
Hmm.
Um, and to me, it's all about the fit with the customer, because I've had AEs selling, especially in enterprise software, where it might do 10 or 12 different use cases. They might sell what they know, but they can't go as wide and as deep as I can in the platform,
Mm.
where I just need to sometimes, even on the fly, think of a custom use case. And hey, I'm not prepared to configure it today. It would take me about an hour to do it, but I can come back next week and show you that we can spin up this report. We can solve that problem that you're focusing on. Now, granted, hopefully all this should have been covered in discovery, but there's always a surprise once in a
Always.
while.
Yeah.
And I really think that we should be key players in go to market, and I think that's why I've gravitated towards where I am now, because I feel even though sales works with the client and the executive team and finance, oftentimes it's pre-sales that works a little bit more horizontally with marketing and product development. They
Mm.
might even be chasing down bugs, and they just have a deeper understanding, which gives them a deeper understanding of product market fit, which is key to go to market.
Yeah.
So, that's just my 2 cents from my little high horse.
Because when you talk about that, I know before we press record and the previous time we caught up, we were talking about the importance of adopting like a project management mentality and a process flow. And one of the things that I've noticed in my career when there's been pre-sales involved, often they get involved too late in the process. And as you say, they're often pigeonholed into being that demo jockey, right? Come in and do all the bells and whistles and impress this customer. And if the customer doesn't like it, it's your fault, right? Um, so how important is it? And it's probably a loaded question, but I'll ask it anyway, to be involved right at the outset and to have that, I guess, seat at the table and
Yeah,
be considered to be a legitimate and strategic component of the customer strategy.
yeah. Great question. And this is an ongoing debate that is not going to be solved today, because from a customer's perspective, you want to reduce friction. I click on a website, I request a demo.
Yeah.
I want to get to that point as soon as possible. So I tell my story to an SDR or an inside salesperson. Then I get an appointment with an account executive who believes that they can do discovery because they've been on hundreds of sales calls, and they attempt to do discovery and they repeat some of the questions that the SER went over. And then the pre-sales team requests a discovery call. That's 3 meetings before a demo.
Mm.
And in today's fast-paced world, that can be quite frustrating. But I've learned to be a bit more flexible and to some degree train my AEs, but with the expectation that the answer they give you you might just take down that answer, which is going to lead me to have 4 follow-up questions. I can't workflow everything. So be prepared for me to either ask for discovery or to join the meeting with the expectation that I'm going to do 10 minutes of discovery and then I'll have enough to go into a demo. Again, trying not to create friction or be the department of no, but trying to work within the system and keep the customer and the account executive happy.
Yeah. And it's a really important point because a lot of times account teams in particular try to, I guess, ring fence their own, I guess, ownership of the account. And sometimes they keep information to themselves and only say, you know what, Mark, I'll bring you in at the right moment, but just hang on, just hold your horses and I'll let you know when it's time to come in. Versus if an account team, if an account director or an account executive was really open and understood that it's okay, they might have ultimate accountability for the sale, for the account, for the profitability, but it's a team effort, right? And in order for that to happen, they need to have as many people across the entire customer life cycle as they possibly can, so that you are educated and you know at the right point when it would be appropriate to do a demo versus because I can imagine from a customer's point of view how frustrating it would be to see in a space of say 4 weeks, 3 different people who have slightly different roles, all asking exactly the same questions. And the customer's sitting there
Yeah.
thinking, hang on a second, don't you guys talk to each other? I've just
Right,
asked,
exactly.
answer this question for the 3rd time, dude. What's going on?
Yeah. Yeah. So with today's technology, it's kind of sad when that doesn't happen. And
Yeah,
there's so many good strategies to collaborate. Number one is just the proper use and hygiene in your CRM, whether that's Salesforce or Zoho or Pipedrive or something completely different. In a way that some of the fields are useful for the pre-sales perspective. And just sharing that record, giving me a login, giving me free access.
yeah,
If it's an existing customer, then I think of platforms like Catalyst, anything giving me kind of where are the red or yellow flags with this customer? What are the challenges that they are having that are blockers to upsell and expanding the relationship? And one of my favorites is Slack, just spinning off a channel for a new prospect or customer support to just have and document those conversations very fluid. If those things aren't happening, then you've got a bigger problem,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, one of my key interview questions, companies talk about collaboration, but I want them to give me, clear examples of how their teams are collaborating and sharing information, to ensure success.
Mm. So with that in mind, I was just writing some notes there. I'm thinking you've got to have some stories in terms of case studies on where things went horribly wrong, but equally when things went really well. And what were some of the key lessons there? So can you take us through, for example, an example where for whatever reason the alignment wasn't quite there, and the organization, or maybe the account executive, or maybe there's a few others involved, we blew a big opportunity. And what was the key lesson there? Because what I'm trying to identify here is for people listening to this, whether they're in a startup organization, whether they're in a big corporate organization, the importance of getting alignment with all of the go-to-market key people is critical, right? And communication is paramount to that. So if we can,
Well, yeah, and I'm trying to think of these stories on the fly. I was reflecting, and when you asked me the two sides of the coin, what went wrong and what
yeah,
went well, you know, the old Billy Joel song says you learn more from your accidents than anything you could ever learn at school. And any motivational speaker will tell you you learn from your mistakes.
yeah,
So when you said that, the first story that popped into my head was potentially a misalignment, a huge misalignment or a big failure, where I went into a key meeting with an account executive that I'd worked with a few times who has a reputation for, how shall I put this politely, pontificating.
okay,
Okay. Okay. So talking at the customer instead of with the customer. And I have an old saying that I use personally, that sometimes a conversation is better than a presentation, right?
Absolutely.
Customers want to learn and be engaged. Well, this person was a brilliant subject matter expert. And in this 1 hour meeting, very old school, formal, lengthy corporate overview deck, followed by screenshots of my demo as she explained screen to screen. Now she's kind of stepping on my toes a bit. And before you knew it, they were asking a second or third time, can we just see the demo? And the demo was supposed to be 40 minutes. We're down to the last 7 to 10 minutes, right? So she said, absolutely. 10 minutes left, we can see the demo. I think what they want to see is use case A, B, and C. And I remember, thank God this happened later in my career and I had the poise to do this. It's the only time I literally put my hand out across the table to basically as a symbol to say, just a moment. It's my stop symbol. Just a moment. And I'm going to leave the names out to protect the guilty. I hear what you're saying, and those are good use cases, but I'd rather hear from the stakeholders on my right, the client, to make sure that you're on track, that they agree. They didn't agree. Okay. She wanted to show A, B, and C, and they wanted X, Y, and Z. Like
Oh man.
completely different. So in the few minutes left, I said, okay, now that we know where we're headed, X, Y, and Z are very similar in this particular workflow. So I'll show you one workflow that applies to those 3 use cases, and we'll talk through it. And I went through it in about 6 minutes at warp speed, key points only. And I said, can we agree that that same workflow with a slight adjustment to the first and third screen would solve use case X, Y, and Z? And they said, oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I remember the SVP of sales was in that meeting. He didn't jump in. He was on his device under the table. And I didn't learn this until later, but he was documenting the call, shall we say.
Okay.
So we provided some coaching feedback to this person after the call and said, look, the good news is you're exceptional. You can go deep. You can absolutely go deep with the customer and really empathize. However, your time management is a disaster. You're running the meeting is where you're falling down.
Yeah.
Now, if you can master that, you'll probably be the best AE in the company.
Yeah.
So we were misaligned on a few things, right? We were misaligned on who's controlling the meeting at what point, and we were misaligned on the use cases and her understanding versus my understanding of the customer needs. And it almost blew up. It was considered a save in the end. And that person now has gone on to a very well-known company as somewhat of a product evangelist. So she is where she should be, not running sales meetings, but as a subject matter expert.
Cool. So in the end, it ended up being a win. Yeah. And
that's correct.
It begs asking the question then in terms of, I guess, planning and the importance of planning, which we'll talk about. How much pre-planning was done in terms of what I call the meeting before the meeting, knowing what the roles and responsibilities are. Just because you had a signal there that says, hey, I'm going to put my hand up. Just say, hang on a second, which probably wasn't even planned. It was just in the moment. But in retrospect, did you think, well, if you had have planned and had a little bit more clarity around what the roles and responsibilities were going to be in that particular meeting, would the outcome have been different?
There was planning. This particular rep had a style that, just kind of losing track of time, perceiving to add more value and going on and going deeper. And one of the challenges for pre-sales or an account executive is when the customer asks a question, understand if the answer is a yes know a little bit of detail or a deeper answer. And if you don't know the difference, you can really just wreck your own meetings.
Yeah.
There's a time when you need to give them space to ask a follow-up question rather than giving them a 5-minute answer.
And I think your comment before around conversations are often better and more effective than a presentation is a
Yes.
fantastic principle to keep in mind, because I'm just reflecting on the number of sales presentations I've been to, either as a salesperson or as a sales leader helping out the salesperson.
Yes.
And I would say with a high degree of certainty, the most of the more effective meetings were ones where we're having conversations where in some cases the presentation was actually put to the side and we had
Yes.
interaction, right? Because there's nothing
Yep.
better than getting real-time feedback, because if I can get the
Yes.
customer to talk, I can actually get a bit of an insight in terms of what their thinking is, and that gives me opportunity to actually plan the next
Yes.
phase.
I would challenge any account executive or any sales engineer to be able to do a meeting through just a conversation and maybe a whiteboard.
Mm,
Don't rely on PowerPoint. Don't rely on a demo. And after a few years, I had the poise to take control of my meetings. One time, a demo turned into two new stakeholders came in the room, and I began to show the intro and the value of how to navigate the solution. And they introduced a new use case. And I knew in my mind I didn't have any demo data to speak to or illustrate what they show. And I confidently closed my laptop. I said, well, I don't have that module loaded today, so I'd like to learn a little bit more about what you're looking for.
yeah.
And I'd certainly be happy to either send you a recording or come back and do it live.
Mm.
So you have to have confidence in yourself, in knowing how to sell and knowing how to position it.
And having the flexibility to change your approach on the spot. Because if something's presented that you hadn't planned for, um,
Right.
you just need to have that flexibility and I guess have the courage to go for it, right? And just
Yeah.
trust,
Yeah.
my intention is here to serve. My intention is to get a solution that's going to serve the client, the customer. I'll just go with it, right? And if it ends up being a good solution, then happy days. If not, well,
Yeah.
I'll
It's like being a pitcher on the mound. My fastball isn't working anymore. Do I do a changeup or do I throw a
yeah,
curve? How can I keep this person from scoring off?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
being flexible, absolutely.
So when we talk, because I do want to talk about some best practice as well around go to market, but one of the key things we've kind of been talking about pre today is the real reason why deals end up in a no decision phase. Now,
Yeah.
I sort of have some ideas as to why this is, and a lot of it's going to do with maybe we don't have a full customer view. We don't have a deeper understanding of what the customer is actually looking for, or the problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah.
What's your experience around this? And having spent many years in this sort of field, um, what sort of themes tend to come out that might lead to this?
Well, I remember from my very early days, there was an accusation or a statement someone made that kind of stuck with me is, that old idea that salespeople are liars. If you ask a salesperson, many of them will claim that more lying occurs on the other end of the table on the customer side than on our side.
Yeah.
So I ask you, for example, so Darren, you're the decision maker, right? And
Oh,
basically the question, yeah, look at that. Look at your body language. The question I'm asking you is, are you important?
yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's the question behind the question. Are you
Yep.
important? Do I
Yep.
really need to talk to you? So a lot of people, especially if they're going to be the manager running the team to be using the software, they might honestly believe that answer. Yes,
Mm.
I'm the decision maker because I have to be happy with this. When really, when it comes down to it, it could be a sign off from a VP or even a CFO,
Yeah.
which from a sales perspective, that's the decision maker. So that's always a reason why things go to no decision. They don't introduce us internally and expand those stakeholder relationships. Um, Another thing is if your value proposition or pain that you're solving for is important to that person, maybe even critical. One thing I've learned from being in GRC for many years, or enterprise risk, is Darren's team might have a risk that's just absolutely crushing and enormous. Maybe a loss event is pending that could be $200,000. But in the context of the overall corporation, it could be very, very small.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so you're worried about your hill of beans, but it might not mean a hill of beans
Exactly.
when you look at it from an enterprise view. So a truly good salesperson should be able to establish relationships and understand how this pain fits in with other projects and other initiatives.
Mm.
That's another reason things go to no decision if they don't have that visibility. And I'm a big, big proponent of following some thought leaders like Simon Sinek. So if you're pitching too early, doing a demo too early, or your presentation too early, and not building enough rapport, empathy, and deep understanding of where they're coming from, I think everyone should watch that key presentation, The Golden Circle, a couple of times, once a year, once every other year, because you pick up something new.
Mm.
And one of the things I always go back to is there's different parts of the brain and how we think and make decisions. And the one that really makes decisions is not a logical part, it's an emotional part that doesn't have a capacity for language, which is why the best salespeople has the best ROI, the best case studies. We're the biggest company, we've got the best price. There's no reason they can reject us, right?
That's it.
And it goes to no decision because the customer says, I don't know, I looked at all the data, it makes sense, but somehow it just doesn't feel right for me. And it doesn't feel right because you haven't connected on an emotional level to their pain.
Yeah.
So finding ways to do that, and none of these are easy, right?
Yeah.
And I've even seen the most seasoned account executives have blind spots. And what I mean by that is, I've been doing this 20 years. I know how to sell. I don't need an account plan because I've generated thousands of them. I'll go in and I can wing it. And some of them can, but if you're at 110% of quota and you're winging it, maybe if you followed the process or methodology that they taught you, maybe you'd be at 150% of quota.
That's it.
Or more.
Yeah.
I actually did an experiment in one of my enablement classes where I had these really bright green people who were interns and now they were new salespeople. And I had these people who've been doing this 10, 15 years or more. And they just sat there with their arms folded, like, what are you going to teach me? And they were just so disruptive. I said, okay, break time. It's lunch, day one. We're not going to function all week like this. So you guys, if you don't want to be here, you're dismissed. But we're going to have a contest for the next quarter to see who brings in, more revenue. And I'll tell you, it surprised me. If you take some smart, coachable young people who are willing to follow a process, they smoked them. I mean, there's no other way to politely say it. It was embarrassing, but it was eye-opening, which is why, as a sales leader, I always advocate that the commission plan drives behavior. Therefore, in addition to just rewarding you with commission and accelerators, I think I should further reward you for following my sales methodology.
Yes.
So Darren's at 110% of quota this year, but because we see an account plan attached to everything in the CRM, because we see he followed the process almost flawlessly, you get another $5,000, $7,000. It's not a windfall.
Yeah.
But no salesperson is going to leave money on the table.
Absolutely not. Absolutely. And there's some key reasons. The one I was really intrigued about was the one where you mentioned about the demo and doing the demo too early. Done a little bit of work with people in the founder space, and they like to get to the demo as quickly as possible, thinking that it's the demo that's going to sell the sell the sizzle, for want of a better term. One of the key things to try and do with those guys is to get them to hold back from a demo and almost make the customer earn the right to have a demo and almost say, well, I'm not going to give you a demo until you sort of jump through these hoops. And from a preemptive selling perspective, often say to them, hey, how can you have a conversation rather than a presentation, going back to what you said before? And how can you resist the temptation to talk about your product, but instead talk about the problem that the customer's trying to solve?
Now, you bring up an excellent point, and another kind of saying that I have that I've used a number of times. I was on a conference call with, and I don't have the book in front of me, but the gentleman, I forget how to pronounce his name, who did the demo to win methodology, the author of that book. He was on a conference call, and I made this comment, and he loved it. My comment was, as you said, sometimes you can speed things up by slowing things down. Okay. So what I mean by that is, preparation, preparation, preparation.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at my other monitor here, when I think of my elements, my top 10 list of a compelling pitch or compelling demo, by understanding the customer deeply, you can have something that hits all of my 10 points. And my first one is a strong opening theme.
Yeah.
That describes their pain in a very creative and memorable way, because it's not the cheapest software that wins. It's not the best software that wins. It's the person that's the most memorable that generally wins the business. A strong opening theme. Then of course, you're going to hit the key features and functions, but they have to be important and specific to that customer. So something you learn through discovery. And then, of course, any good SE is going to give you business value, answering the question, why on earth is this important? Now, I like to go a level deeper. I like to explore stakeholder value, which answers the question, who cares? Okay, does the CFO care about this? Does the executive team care about this? Does the risk team performing those tasks care about this? And guess what? If there's no executives in the room, why on earth would you waste time showing the cool executive dashboard?
Yeah.
Right? Because nobody cares.
Exactly.
And then, of course, with the right research, bringing up those market differentiators that should resonate with this customer. Of course, industry use cases. And one hack that I have for industry use cases is when I go into a company, I ask marketing to give me the industry use cases. And usually they'll just either give me a link or a dump of like 20 use cases. And I'll give them to my team when they're hired and say, you only need to memorize 2 out of the gate, but you need to memorize them deeply. So from the first demo, you can bring up at least 2 use cases and you're going to sound like you've been here for 3 years. That's an important part of storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully you have quantifiable ROI. That's point number 7. Point number 8 is very specific questions and timing to challenge or engage the client. The reason I say this is there's a reason, the way the brain works, there's a reason that TED Talks are generally not more than 10 to 20 minutes. Because after that, you're going to start to daydream.
That's it.
And, make sure we call it coming up for air. Do part of a use case, establish the value, come up for air, and then ask questions that demand a deeper answer. Not, did you like what you saw? Oh, gosh. Yeah. How many AEs? Yes, I like what I saw. Now get out, lunchtime. How do you feel about what you saw, Darren?
Yeah.
How do you envision that helping you and your team? And just let them talk. Of course, demonstrating that the script is tailored to the client. And finally, a closing should be, everyone says a strong call to action, but no one ever does it. You know what they do? They say, well, you need to go live by the 15th of June, and here's our plan to get there, and here's the benefits you're going to receive. Any questions? And then, my God, they go into questions for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So the last thing that they remember, which sticks in their mind, is every question and doubt that they had about your solution. What you need to do is do those questions second to last,
Yeah.
and then you're closing relating to your opening theme and that strong call to action to end on that high note. And I'm still amazed how many people don't do that.
Well, and it's almost like closing the loop, if you like. So if you've got a really strong
Exactly.
opening
I call
statement,
it bookending, right?
yeah,
You've got
absolutely.
the opening and the ending.
Yeah, because when you think about a great presenter, a great presentation, they'll actually do some sort of creative opening, and it could be a quote, it could be a story, it could be a metaphor, but they grab your attention straight away. And if, from a selling perspective, if you can really articulate and put the customer in the middle of the problem that they tell me they've got, and create a certain feeling, I've got to loop it back and make sure that at the end, when I'm closing it off, I've got to now tie those two together, because if not, they're just going to have either a bad feeling that the problem's not going to be solved, or they'll think, well, that was nice. Now what?
Yeah, yeah. And while you're taking them along that journey, another inspirational thought leader that not many people have heard of is Nancy Duarte. She is a researcher at a university here in the States, and she has a YouTube presentation. I think it's called The Secrets of Great Speeches or something along those lines. As long as you spell her name and Secrets of Great Speeches, it'll come up. She basically did, like, I think it was her PhD on great presentations and great speeches. And she took Steve Jobs introducing the iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, you had all this technology spread out on the table, and now it fits in your pocket, right?
Yeah.
And it's the delta between current misery or dissatisfaction and utopia. And the greater that distance, the more energized they'll be. The second speech she analyzed is a classic, Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream.
Yep.
Today, there's misery, and we're dumped on, we don't have rights, and I have a dream that men are treated equally and judged by the content of their character. And she looked at the highs and lows in those speeches and analyzed the timing, like by the minute.
Yep.
And they lined up almost exactly. And she's like, Eureka, I've unlocked the formula.
Yeah, which is probably a scientific thing from human behavior in terms of attention spans and things like that.
Yeah. And I forget who, but there was some other researcher that talked about the rate of speech.
Yeah. Okay.
And we kind of all know that if someone's a fast talker, you don't trust them, right? If someone's too slow, you wonder, are they having trouble forming their thoughts? Are they smart?
Yeah.
And so, like, there's a middle ground of like words per minute.
Yes.
And that is like the sweet spot.
Yeah.
And I've got to find that again. I've never tested it myself, but I thought that was pretty interesting.
It's what we're saying there is there's so much that goes into having a conversation, making a presentation, doing a pitch. So as we wrap up, Mark, what's the and thanks for covering off some of those what I consider to be some best practices around pre-sales. If there was one key message to leave the listeners when it comes to pre-sales, one thing that either we've talked about today or perhaps we haven't talked about yet that you could leave people with in terms of a key thing to grab hold of and move forward to hopefully improve either their engagement internally, but more specifically the engagement with their client base, what would that be?
I think overall, I've called pre-sales both an art and a science. And speaking of art, I want to give credit to one of my former peers. He was my trainer and somewhat of a mentor. His name was Art Bykov. And every time he did a demo, he said, my name is Art Bykov. And most people say, hey, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and why you should listen to me, right? And they give you their resume. And, he only said like two things. He says, my name is Art Bykov, a little bit about me. My favorite color is blue, and I love short walks on the beach.
There you go.
Right? And that's all he said. And in a very technical sale. And I asked him, why do you tell that same tired joke every time? And he says, first of all, it's not a tired joke because it's new to every new prospect.
Yes.
He says, what I'm looking for is teeth. I said, what do you mean you're looking at their teeth? He says, if I tell that joke and I don't see any teeth, that means I'd better be formal and buttoned up for the rest of the hour.
Yes.
If I see teeth or a big smile, then I can be light and a little goofy. And I thought, what a subtly brilliant way to read the room.
Mm.
So the best advice I want to leave the listeners with, since I remembered that from years ago, I think the best SEs in the world are thieves and chameleons.
Yep.
We constantly look and learn from each other, what resonates with the customer, what our peers are doing, and even what our AEs are doing and how they say things. And we borrow and decide to pull that out of an ever-increasing toolkit or bag of tricks.
Love it. Love it. Brilliant. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. For people who want to, first of all, connect with you, but also learn a little bit more about you, but also maybe get a bit of info on SwarmDynamics, where's the best place for them to connect and to find out more?
Yes, briefly, I'm on LinkedIn and very easy to find because my name is embedded in my URL. It's Mark with a K, Winey, W-I-N, or wine, wine like you drink, and you add a Y at the end. Easy to find me on LinkedIn. SwarmDynamics is simply spelled swarmdynamics.ai. And we're excited to be jumping into the US market. We're very disruptive, probably one of the first companies to do true predictive risk management for both compliance and also team and individual performance. We're doing some really exciting work. And our first customers out of the gate are global banks. And we are winning against, all I can tell you is we're winning against some of the biggest household names in the AI space.
Brilliant. Love it. Love it. Well, I look forward to following that journey and another Australian story, which is fantastic. Mark, all the way from New Jersey. Greatly appreciate the time and thanks so much for sharing on the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast, my friend.
All right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks, mate. You too.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.